It was a hot morning in Ciudad Juárez, the kind of heat that makes the streets feel empty. Even the air seemed tired, heavy with dust and silence. The police van moved slowly along a quiet road. It stopped in front of a small, forgotten building. Its white paint had turned yellow. The letters on the sign were broken and faded: Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo. People's Funeral Services. It was a private crematorium, small. Not fancy, just one of many in this busy border city. But behind that tired appearance, this place had a long history. It opened more than 20 years ago, during a time when Ciudad Juárez was struggling. The city had become a place of violence, missing persons, and overcrowded morgues. The local government couldn't keep up with the number of dead, so places like Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo became useful and quietly important. They handled the bodies the city couldn't. Families who couldn't afford expensive funerals brought their loved ones here. It was cheap, fast, and close by. Some said it wasn't pretty, but it worked. Others whispered that the place cut corners, but no one could prove anything. The man who owned the crematorium was named Carlos Gonzalez, in his mid-50s, quiet, clean-shaven, always in a short-sleeved white shirt. People in the neighborhood called him Don Carlos. He rarely spoke to reporters, never opened the place to visitors, but he had contracts, official ones. Some came directly from small funeral homes. Others, it was said, came quietly from the government itself, when bodies were unclaimed, when morgues were too full. They called Don Carlos, but over the years something changed. Rumors began to grow. Some families said the ashes they received didn't feel right, too light, too gray, too cold. Others said they were told the body had already been cremated, even when they hadn't given permission yet. A former employee who asked to remain anonymous had sent a letter to a local journalist. In the letter he wrote, "They are not burning all the bodies, they are just keeping them, I don't know where. But the smell sometimes is too much to hide." The journalist forwarded the tip to authorities. He didn't expect much. But then other complaints started arriving: anonymous phone calls, small notes, quiet warnings. So on a Monday morning, the city's health department issued a routine inspection order. Officially, they were checking for sanitation problems and possible improper body storage. Unofficially, they feared something worse. 3 officers arrived that day, 2 men, 1 woman. They weren't expecting much. They thought it would be a quick visit, maybe an overfilled fridge or poor ventilation. What they found was beyond anything they had seen in their careers. One officer knocked, no answer. He knocked again, louder, still silence. He tried the handle. It opened. The metal door creaked as it moved. The air that escaped from inside hit their faces like a wall. It was warm, damp, and filled with a strange, sharp smell. Not smoke, not chemicals, but something rotting. The 3 officers looked at each other. One pulled out his flashlight and stepped inside. The hallway was narrow and dark. The walls were yellow from age and heat. There were no windows, no sound. As they walked deeper inside, the smell grew stronger. The air became thicker, harder to breathe. Then they reached the first door on the left. It was closed, but the smell behind it was almost unbearable. The female officer turned the knob and pushed it open. What she saw made her step back. The room was filled with bodies, not in caskets, not prepared for funerals. Just lying there on the floor on top of each other, wrapped in plastic, in blankets, or nothing at all. Some looked recent. Others had dried out, skin like leather. Some were still dressed. Others half-wrapped in thin sheets. A few had name tags. Many didn't. The room was not cold. There were no fans, no freezers, just silence and death. The officers stared in shock. One covered his mouth, the other cursed under his breath. This was not just a health violation. This was something else. Something darker. They backed out and called for backup. Over the next hours, more officers arrived. Forensics teams, health officials, local journalists who heard whispers and came looking for answers. The building was searched room by room. Behind every door, more bodies. In total, there were 381. 381 men, women, and possibly some children. Not burned, not cremated, just left there, stacked like forgotten boxes. One room held bodies wrapped in thick black bags. Another room had corpses piled on plastic stretchers. Some were hidden under tarps. Some had melted candles placed beside them, as if someone once tried to honor them and then gave up. The air was toxic. Investigators wore masks. Even with protection, some had to step outside, vomiting, shaking. It was too much. In the back of the crematorium, the team found the furnace. It hadn't been used in weeks, maybe months. Ashes inside the chamber didn't match the number of bodies, and then they found something else. A pile of urns, neatly stacked, dozens of them, each labeled with names, dates, kind words like forever loved or rest in peace. But they were too light. Tests would later show many urns didn't contain human ashes. Some were filled with cement powder. Others held burned wood. One had gravel mixed with ash. The families who had received those urns. They had been lied to. One mother would say later, "I kissed the urn every day. I thought my son was in there. Now I don't know where he is. Maybe he's still lying on that floor." Ciudad Juárez is not new to death. It has lived through drug wars, kidnappings, and years of fear. But this was different. This was not murder. This was neglect. This was betrayal. As news spread, panic grew. Families rushed to funeral homes, demanding answers. Some brought in their urns. Others stared at them in silence, afraid to open them. A man cried outside a church, holding a small box. "My mother died in 2021. I thought she was resting in peace. Now, I don't know if she was ever cremated." The owner of the crematorium, Carlos Gonzalez, was found later that evening. He was at home, calm, silent. When arrested, he said only, "When the news broke, the city held its breath. People stayed home, watching the story unfold on TV, on their phones, and in silence. Some cried, some stared at their hands, holding urns that now felt like lies. Others refused to believe it, not yet. In a small living room, a woman named Alina sat on the edge of her couch. She had just watched the news report about the 381 bodies found in the crematorium. She didn't move. In her hands was a ceramic urn, smooth, white, with gold letters that read, "Antonio Ruiz, beloved son, 1992-2022. Alina had paid 2,000 pesos to Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo last year. They told her Antonio had been cremated within 24 hours of death. They handed her this urn, along with a receipt and a printed certificate. She brought it home, placed it on a shelf with candles and flowers. Every morning she greeted it, every night she said good night. But now, as she held the urn tighter, her hands shook. What if he was never burned? What if her son was still lying on that floor? Alina slowly opened the lid. Inside, grayish dust, cold, dry, and strangely lumpy. She had never questioned it before. Now she didn't know what she was holding. In another house, far across town, a man named Miguel held his wife's urn. She died during the pandemic when funeral services were overwhelmed. He remembered how fast it had all happened. He was told she would be cremated the next day. He never got to see her body. He wasn't even allowed inside the crematorium. They gave him the urn in a plastic bag. He didn't open it then. He just cried. Now he opened it. What he saw inside didn't look like ashes. It looked like dirt. Dark, grainy, mixed with what seemed like small stones. He didn't cry this time. He just stared at it, empty. Calls began flooding into the city's health department. Hundreds of people, angry, confused, terrified. Some demanded tests. Others wanted justice, and some, like Alina, just wanted the truth, no matter how painful it was. The city of Ciudad Juárez became a place of quiet grief, not the kind that comes with funerals, flowers, or soft music. This grief had no shape, no closure, just questions and silence. Outside the crematorium, people began to gather, not to protest, not yet. They stood in groups, holding urns in plastic bags. Some had come alone, others with family. All were waiting. A temporary office was set up nearby. Health officials placed a sign outside, Verification and Identification Center. People could bring in urns. Inside, a team of forensic specialists would open them, analyze the contents, and, if possible, tell them what they really had. By noon, the line stretched around the block. One man, Eduardo, held his mother's urn close to his chest. He had just retired. He was supposed to take her ashes to the mountains she loved. Now he wasn't sure if he should take anything at all. When it was his turn, he walked in, hands shaking. The technician opened the urn, scooped a small sample into a plastic tray, and took it to the back room. 15 minutes later, the technician returned with a clipboard. He didn't look Eduardo in the eye. "I'm sorry," he said. "These are not human ashes. We found traces of charcoal, wood, and concrete dust." Eduardo didn't speak. He simply sat down on the floor, urn still in his hands. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Then where is she?" By the end of that first day, over 60 urns had been tested. Only a handful contained real human remains. Most did not. Some families left in anger, others left in silence. One woman, after hearing the results, smashed the urn outside the building. Ash scattered into the wind. She fell to her knees. The authorities launched a formal investigation. But already damage was done. DNA testing of the 381 bodies began slowly, but it was difficult. Many bodies were decomposed beyond recognition. Others were incomplete. Some had no documents, no tags, nothing. Matching them to families would take months, maybe years, and some might never be identified. A local journalist named Ana Rivera began interviewing families. She met with over 40 people who had received urns from Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo in the past 5 years. She found a pattern. Many were poor. Many were rushed into cremation without full explanation. Many were told, "You can't see the body anymore, it's already in process." All had received similar urns, the same model, same size, same printed labels. Some certificates had spelling mistakes. Some had the same serial number. A few had no real signature at all. Anna published her findings in a blog post titled, "The Second Death: How a City Failed Its Dead." The article went viral, not just in Mexico, but across the world. Meanwhile, forensic workers continued trying to piece together identities. They created a wall inside the identification center, rows of photos, not of faces, but of jewelry, tattoos, scars, anything that could help someone say, "That was my mother's ring. That tattoo belonged to my brother." A boy named Louis, only 14, pointed at one photo. It was a silver bracelet with a tiny soccer ball charm. "That was my sister S," he said. "She never took it off." The DNA later confirmed it. His sister had died 2 years ago. The family had been told she was cremated, but she had been lying on the floor of that crematorium all this time. The family returned the urn they had been given. Inside it was cement mixed with sawdust. The mother held her daughter's real remains at last, not in an urn, but in a sealed black bag. They buried her again, for real this time, but not every family got that chance. Some never found a match. Some had lost the only proof, the documents, the certificates. Some had scattered the ashes already, fake ashes, into rivers, into gardens, believing they were doing something sacred. Now they didn't know what to believe anymore. Back at the identification center, a volunteer said, "They cry in silence. They look at the urns like strangers. It's like they lost their loved one twice." In the evenings, candles were lit along the street where the crematorium once operated. People left photos, flowers, small notes. One read, "Forgive us, we trusted them." Another simply said, "You were not garbage." By the second week, Ciudad Juárez was no longer quiet. The silence had cracked, and from the cracks came voices, loud, angry, desperate. People marched outside the city hall, holding framed photos of the dead. Some held urns high above their heads like proof of betrayal. A woman shouted through a megaphone, "You gave us dust, you gave us lies." The crowd answered back, "Justicia, justicia. Justice, justice." Candles still burned outside the crematorium, but now they were surrounded by signs. "Where is my father? My son was not trash. We want names, we want truth." Anger had replaced sorrow. The second grief was sharper than the first. Local officials released statements. They said the investigation was ongoing. They said they understood the pain. They promised a full review of funeral regulations. But many saw it as too little, too late. Social media did what official channels could not. Photos of the inside of the crematorium, the black bags, the piles of corpses spread quickly online. Some people said it was too graphic. Others said, "The world needs to see what they did to our loved ones." Hashtags began trending in Mexico. "This is not ash." "Where are the bodies?" "Fake cremations." National newspapers picked up the story. TV anchors spoke with emotion rarely seen before. One journalist on air said, "This is not a mistake. This is not one bad man. This is a system that let death become a business and forgot that behind each body is a name." International reporters arrived. Some compared the case to mass graves. Others said it was worse because this time families thought they had closure. They thought they had said goodbye. But now they were saying goodbye all over again, without a body, without peace, without answers. At night, talk shows invited psychologists, priests, sociologists. One priest said, "These people were not just abandoned in death. They were denied their dignity, and their families were denied their final prayer." Ana Rivera, the journalist who had broken the first major story, received threats. She continued anyway. She released interviews with former employees of the crematorium. One audio clip went viral. "We told Carlos we couldn't keep storing them. He said, just push them into the back room. They'll be fine." One day I saw a woman's body with a wedding ring still on her hand. I thought she had a story, and now she's just part of the pile. The public wanted names, not just Carlos Gonzalez, but others, who approved the contracts, who looked the other way. Were city officials involved? Did any funeral homes know what was really happening? But investigations were slow. Families grew more frustrated. A man named Jorge, whose daughter died in 2020, said on camera, "They told me her body was cremated. I never saw her again. Now I find out her name was never written on the crematorium log. No record, no ashes. No truth." Meanwhile, the identification team worked day and night, but progress was slow. Of the 381 bodies, fewer than 50 had been positively identified. Forensic scientists explained that heat, moisture, and time had damaged many of the remains. DNA results were delayed. Families were told to wait. Some waited patiently. Others said they couldn't take it anymore. One man handed his urn back to the government building and said, "Keep it. It's not mine. My mother is still missing, and this dust, it doesn't deserve to be on our altar." The media kept the story alive, pushing updates, demanding accountability. But slowly, other news began to take over the headlines. A new scandal, an election, a celebrity drama. The case of the fake ashes started to fade, not gone, but softer, quieter. Some called it the second silence. But for the families, the silence never truly returned. Weeks passed. The line at the identification center grew shorter, not because the work was done, but because some families had stopped coming. They were tired of waiting. Tired of wondering, tired of asking questions and getting silence in return. Some chose to hold new memorials, even without a body, even without truth. They gathered in small groups, in homes, in churches, on dusty sidewalks, and lit candles. They spoke the names of their loved ones, they cried, they prayed, and then they tried to move forward, but for others there was no peace. One woman, Rosa, refused to put the urn back on the altar. "If it's not him," she said, holding the container in her lap, "then I've been mourning a lie. I can't pray to a lie." She kept the urn under her bed, out of sight, out of reach. She didn't know what to do with it. She couldn't bury it. She couldn't throw it away, so it stayed there like a wound that never closed. Across the city, psychologists began to see more people. People who weren't sleeping, people who felt haunted, not by ghosts but by questions. One man said in a session, "I feel like my father is still waiting for me, waiting to be found, waiting for me to bring him home." Before the scandal, no one paid much attention to Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo. It was just another name on a long list of small funeral businesses in Ciudad Juárez. It had a license. It had a furnace. It filed reports, or at least it said it did. No one asked for more, but after the bodies were found, after the fake ashes, the empty urns, the broken families, the country began to ask one question: how did this happen? And beneath that question was a darker one: who let this happen? The answer was not one man, not just Carlos Gonzalez, not just one business. The answer was a system. A broken system that allowed things to slip through cracks so wide, entire lives disappeared. It started with the licensing process. In Mexico, funeral homes and crematoriums are regulated by local health departments. In theory, they must be inspected once a year. They must keep records. They must report how many cremations are performed. They must prove that bodies are handled properly. But in Ciudad Juárez, like many cities under pressure, paperwork often mattered more than people. Investigators discovered that Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo had not been inspected in over 4 years. The last recorded visit by a health inspector was dated March 2019. Even then, it was a brief stop, 20 minutes. No photos were taken. No irregularities were noted. The report was stamped and filed. Later, it was revealed that the inspector had never entered the back rooms. He had only spoken to Carlos at the front door. When asked why, the inspector said, "He told me everything was in order. I had no reason to doubt him." But the signs were there. Records from the civil registry showed hundreds of death certificates listing the crematorium as the place of final disposition. Yet, the logs kept by the crematorium didn't match. Some names appeared in the registry, but were missing from the crematorium's internal files. Others appeared more than once, suggesting duplication or something worse. The registry office claimed they were not responsible for verifying the cremations. They simply received the documents and archived them. The funeral homes said they were told everything was taken care of. They handed over the bodies, got a receipt, and moved on. And the city health office, they blamed lack of resources. One official said, "We have only 3 inspectors for over 120 funeral businesses. We cannot be everywhere." This excuse angered many. Ana Rivera, the journalist, wrote, "How can you cremate hundreds of people and no one checks the ashes? How can 381 bodies rot in rooms and no one notices the smell?" Whistleblower came forward. A former clerk at the municipal office said that sometimes death records were rushed. Families were poor. Hospitals needed space. The crematorium offered quick service. So officials looked the other way. "It was easier to sign the paper," she said, "than to ask questions." Another employee, this time from a local hospital, shared a disturbing detail. "Sometimes we didn't even know if the body got burned. We just sent it and hoped for the best." A retired coroner admitted that in some cases, unclaimed bodies were sent directly to Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo without identification. No DNA, no family contact. Just a body handed over and forgotten. The deeper investigators dug, the more rot they uncovered. It wasn't just about ashes, it was about accountability, and the truth was simple: there was none. For many families in Ciudad Juarez, death was not a choice, but how someone was buried or burned was. The truth was, cremation was cheaper, much cheaper. A basic cremation could cost around 2,000 pesos, less than $120. A traditional burial could cost 5 times more, and that didn't include the land, the coffin, or the ongoing fees. In a city where many live on daily wages, that difference was everything. So when a funeral home suggested cremation, most families said yes. When the crematorium said, "We'll take care of the paperwork," they agreed. No questions, no second thoughts, only trust, but trust was the first thing broken. Documents later showed that Servicios Funerarios del Pueblo had deals with at least 8 small funeral homes. In some cases, the same man, Carlos Gonzalez, owned shares in both. That meant he controlled the body from the moment it left the hospital until it was declared ash. There were no outside checks, no audits, no second eyes. He wrote the rules, he approved the receipts. He handed the urn to the grieving mother and said, "Here he is." But the problem wasn't just Carlos, it was what surrounded him, or rather, what didn't. In one meeting after the discovery, the state governor was asked, how could 381 bodies go unnoticed? The governor replied, "This is a municipal issue." When the mayor was asked the same question, he said, "We were never informed of any irregularities." When the head of the health department spoke, she admitted, "Our system was not designed to track remains after they leave hospitals." In short, no one knew, no one checked, and no one wanted responsibility. The truth floated in circles like smoke. Behind the scenes, civil registry staff admitted that record-keeping was outdated. Some death certificates were written by hand, some were sent by fax. Others were submitted through a system so old it could not connect with police, forensic, or health databases. There was no central tracking number, no digital chain of custody. Once a body left the morgue, it simply disappeared. In other cities, the system was better, but Juarez had been overwhelmed for years. Too many deaths, too few workers, too little funding. Back in 2017, the city had requested help from the federal government to upgrade its burial tracking system. The request was denied, reason, low priority. They said it was not urgent. By 2023, hundreds of cremations were being processed every month, but the staff in charge of checking logs hadn't grown. It remained 3 people, 3 desks, 3 overworked employees signing papers, stamping documents, trying to keep up, and in that flood of names and files, mistakes became normal, silence became policy. Ana Rivera, still investigating, wrote, "This isn't about one criminal. This is about a system that forgot how to care." Her article quoted a former city employee who said, "Sometimes I didn't want to ask questions. Because if I asked, I might have to stop the process, and there were always more bodies waiting." The system was not just broken, it had grown used to being broken. People stopped reporting small things. They stopped questioning little errors, because there was always something bigger coming next. Even hospitals were guilty. Some doctors admitted they filled out death certificates without full information. Sometimes they didn't even write the real cause of death. They wrote something safe, something that wouldn't delay the cremation, because delays meant space problems, and space problems meant more pressure. One coroner said, "We were told to make it simple, don't complicate the paperwork, don't ask too much, just move the body." So body after body disappeared, signed, stamped, delivered, into a place no one checked until it was too late. The victims in this story were not famous, they weren't rich, they didn't have lawyers or private mausoleums, most came from poor families. They lived in working-class neighborhoods or no neighborhood at all. Some died in shelters. Some were migrants far from home. Some had no one left to claim them. When they died, they didn't get headlines. They got invoices, and eventually silence. That silence was comfortable for those in power. Because if no one complains, there is nothing to fix. If no one asks questions, there are no answers to give. And if the poor suffer quietly, the system moves on. But the scandal changed that, even if only for a while. For the first time, the invisible were seen. For the first time, the voiceless were spoken for, but it came at a price. Grieving families now had to fight two battles, the sorrow of loss and the rage of betrayal. They weren't just mourning loved ones, they were mourning trust, trust in their city, trust in the people who were supposed to protect them, even in death. One man, Jorge, whose wife had been cremated in 2022, said in an interview, "We were poor, but we tried to do everything right. We paid, we prayed, we trusted. Now I hold a box of cement and lies." And he wasn't alone. A young woman named Yesenia had lost her grandmother during the pandemic. They couldn't have a funeral. They received the urn in a cardboard box with no ceremony, no goodbye. She kept it on her dresser for 2 years. She lit candles. She told stories to her baby daughter about the woman inside. Now tests confirmed there were no human remains in the urn. She wept in the arms of her mother. "I gave my daughter a lie," she said. "I told her grandma was watching over us, but grandma never came home." The government issued statements, promised reforms, they held press conferences, launched internal reviews. But most families didn't watch anymore. They knew better. They knew this wasn't about reforms, it was about worth. And some stories fade with time, but this one refused to go away. Even months later, the city of Juarez still carried the weight of what happened. The smell of rot was gone, the police tape was removed, the news cameras had moved on. But the pain stayed, and so did the questions. What now? What next? How do you bury someone twice? For some, the answer was simple: you fight. A group of 20 families formed a collective. They called themselves Voces de Ceniza, Voices of Ash. They met in living rooms, borrowed offices, and empty churches. They brought their urns, their documents, their doubts. Some had received confirmation, their ashes were fake, others still didn't know. But all of them had the same mission, to make sure this never happened again. They wrote letters, they filed lawsuits, they contacted human rights organizations, not just in Mexico, but abroad. And slowly, the world began to listen again. One of the founders, Elena, the mother of Antonio, became the quiet face of the movement. She never shouted, she never accused. She simply carried a photo of her son and said, "This is who they forgot, this is who I remember." The group organized vigils, not just for their own loved ones, but for the unnamed, the forgotten, the ones still waiting in morgue freezers and plastic bags. They lit candles along the river. Each flame a name, even if the name had been lost. As their story grew, so did their allies. A team of young lawyers from Mexico City offered to help. They worked pro bono, for free, and began digging into public records. What they found was disturbing. Dozens of irregularities in contracts between the city and funeral providers. Evidence of fake cremation certificates used to claim government reimbursements. Internal emails where officials expressed concern, but never acted. This wasn't just negligence. It was quiet corruption, and someone had to answer for it. The lawyers pushed for criminal charges, not just against Carlos Gonzalez, but against the inspectors, the health officials, the funeral homes who looked the other way. The process was slow, painful, filled with delays, but it had begun. The movement caught the attention of a national senator. She brought the issue to the floor of Congress. She read aloud the names of victims. She held up a black urn, and she said, "This is not an object. This is what's left when we let bureaucracy bury humanity." Soon after, new legislation was proposed, the Dignified Death Act. It called for a national database to track every body from death to final disposition. Mandatory DNA samples before cremation. Public audits of all crematoriums every 6 months. Criminal penalties for falsifying cremation records. Some politicians resisted. They said it would be too expensive, that it would slow down the process, that not all families want that kind of oversight. But the public disagreed. Polls showed over 80% of citizens supported stricter funeral regulations. And many wrote letters to their representatives with one simple message: we don't want perfect, we want respect. In the meantime, Voces de Ceniza did more than fight the system. They created a memorial. Not made of stone or steel, but of stories. They launched a website, www.cenizasquehablan.org, Ashes That Speak. It featured the names, photos, and memories of those believed to be victims of the fake cremations. Each profile began not with how they died, but how they lived, their favorite food, their laugh, their last message, because they were not statistics, they were people. Elena's son Antonio had written poems. One of them was published on the site. It ended with the line, "When I am gone, light a candle, not for my death, but for the moments I made you feel alive." The page went viral. Families from other cities came forward, some with doubts, some with unopened urns. The truth had started in Juárez, but it didn't end there. As the months passed, the city of Juárez began to change, not quickly, not cleanly, but change all the same. The crematorium was permanently closed. The building stood empty, windows boarded, gates locked, but the people didn't forget. Every year on the anniversary of the discovery, candles are lit along the street, photos are taped to the walls, names are spoken, songs are sung. Some of the families come, others send flowers, some leave quiet notes: "I miss you. I'm sorry I didn't know. You are still loved." The legal battles continue. Some officials have resigned, a few have been charged. Carlos Gonzalez remains in prison awaiting trial, but justice is slow and fragile and incomplete. Still, small victories come. A new inspection office opens. A digital tracking system is rolled out across several states. Young people study forensic science, inspired by the case. Families who once felt alone now speak at universities, conferences, even schools. They tell the story not to scare, but to remind that dignity in death is not a luxury. It is a right. Elena, now older, keeps Antonio's photo beside her bed. Next to it is the urn, empty still. She never filled it again. She didn't need to. Carlos Gonzalez, the man at the center of the scandal, now sits in a small prison cell in northern Chihuahua. Once the quiet owner of a modest crematorium, he is now a symbol of everything that went wrong. He rarely speaks to the press. When he does, he says little, that he didn't mean to hurt anyone, that he was overwhelmed, that mistakes were made. But prosecutors see it differently. He is facing multiple charges, including fraud for issuing false cremation certificates, abuse of corpses for improper handling and storage of human remains, obstruction of justice for falsifying records and misleading investigators, criminal negligence for allowing health hazards and emotional damage to hundreds of families. If found guilty on all counts, Carlos could face up to 40 years in prison. Some legal experts believe the sentence will depend not only on evidence but on public pressure. The case is high profile, the country is watching, and the families are demanding more than punishment. They want accountability. Inside prison, Carlos lives in isolation, not for his protection, but because other inmates refuse to live near him. They say they don't trust a man who lied about the dead. They say he has no honor. One guard told a journalist he stays quiet most days. He stares out the window like he's trying to disappear. But disappearance is no longer possible. His name is tied to the scandal. His story is part of the shame. And when the trial begins, his past and the past he tried to hide will return to face him in front of a courtroom, in front of the families, in front of the country, because some ashes still speak. If this story moved you, if it made you stop and think, then please take a moment to support our channel. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Rose and Crime for more.